Welcome to the Holistic Health Bites podcast. I'm your host, Andrea Nicholson, crime scene investigator turned functional health investigator. This podcast is here to share bite-sized episodes and unique interviews on a wide variety of health topics to empower, enlighten, and educate you to live your best, most vibrant life. Disclaimer: all information you hear on this podcast is for information only and constitutes individual opinions of the person speaking. This should not be taken as medical advice. Being a listener of this show does not initiate a practitioner-client relationship between you and the hosts or panelists on this show. Please discuss these topics with your medical professionals before making any changes to your health. Okay, let's dive in. Welcome back to the Holistic Health Bites podcast. Today, we are going to have an interesting conversation around various chronic illnesses and specifically some things that are often undiagnosed or difficult to diagnose or just don't get diagnosed quickly. And I have a special guest today, Tiffany Flaten, who is going to share her story with some thyroid issues that went undiagnosed for a long time. So welcome, Tiffany. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Will you just tell everyone really quickly, kind of who you are and maybe just like a synopsis to the story, and then we'll dive much deeper.
Sure. So my name is Tiffany Flaten, and I'm a board certified and licensed nutritionist. And I came to that eventually as sort of a second career because of my own health journey of dealing with undiagnosed things for so long, struggling with horrible symptoms, test results always coming back as normal. And then eventually I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. And ironically, I thought this will be the answers to my problems and I'll get this figured out, taken care of, because they told me it was, the quote unquote easy cancer. So I wasn't super worried. And I thought things would change once I got my medication going and everything would work well. And I got worse. And so then I had to dig deep. And the only thing that I hadn't really dug into and tried to uncover was my nutrition, because my nutrition in general, I'd always been interested in that, was pretty decent. And relatively speaking, compared to people in my circle, in my world, how, they ate compared to how I ate or prepared foods or whatever, it just seemed like that was not something to dig into. And my doctors actually told me, that what I eat really doesn't affect how I feel. So then with that knowledge or that comment that I got repeatedly over and over when I wasn't feeling well, I was like, I think I need to look into my nutrition because that's just not right. So that's where I went back into it and got into my school so I could do what I'm doing now and have the credentials to do it.
Oh, I love that. And, I think that's so common for a lot of us that get into this field is, we think we eat pretty good. We think we're doing pretty good because, you look around and you're like, well, I definitely don't eat those things. And I definitely don't do that. And yes. I had the same thing. I would have told you I had a really good diet and I knew a lot about nutrition from all my biology classes and all the things. And compared to what I know now, I wasn't even in the ballpark of healthy eating. I was better than the average SAD diet for sure. But yeah, there's always room for improvement. Even still today, as much as I know, there's still room for improvement.
Yeah, none of us do all the right things all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe dive in a little bit more into, what you did uncover as you went through the training and learned more about nutrition, and maybe what are some of the mistakes that you found that you were making that you thought were actually really good?
Yeah. So I don't know. It's kind of a rabbit hole to get into. So I'll try to not get too deep in it. But I think the most frustrating things for me were the fatigue and the depression. The fatigue was, I can really only describe it from my experiences as even being remotely similar to that first trimester pregnancy fatigue. That's kind of the only way that I can even make it make sense to other people who have been in that shape or have had that during pregnancy. But that was the most, debilitating thing. And then the depression that came with it, wrapped into anxiety, it's like kind of that whole spectrum of that depression, anxiety piece, that became unbearable. And I had made the mistake of, which at the time, I don't know if it maybe actually did help me a little bit to just get by, but it was when I was an undergrad in particular, was really bad. And I started taking antidepressants. But then the problem was I would titrate up to the highest dose you could go, and then I'd have to switch a medicine, and it never really did anything, nothing. And all the while, my thyroid results were always normal. And so what I learned when I dug into things further is that they were only testing the TSH.
Yep.
Any provider I ever saw, didn't matter what kind, what specialty, always tested only TSH, which of course there's a wide spectrum. It doesn't really tell us a whole lot, right? It doesn't even tell us how much thyroid hormone we have in our body. And that was kind of the big thing, the big aha moment where I'm like, oh my gosh, they never really looked into all this stuff. And then just to step back a little further, so my undergrad is in biology, microbiology, took a lot of anatomy and phys as well. Plus I taught it at the high school and like college level classes in the high school. And so I knew this already. I had understanding of this, but I didn't really apply it to myself because when they said, oh, your tests are normal, just stress less and you're getting older. And I was in my 20s.
Always the answer. You're just getting older. Always.
Yeah, so you're supposed to fall apart when you're 25 or something
Right.
like that. And so that's what led to this sort of spiral of finding it's got to be the depression. So I'll just take, antidepressants and anti-anxieties and I'll get better. And like I said, it just maybe took the edge off a little bit, but I never understood because then I coupled that because I thought, well, I have to do something also with this, depression to help with the medication. So I needed to do, therapy. So I did years and years and years and years of therapy, which I'm sure helped at some level, but it never made me improve my energy or it didn't really improve my mood. It maybe helped me deal with coping with things or whatever. But it didn't help that kind of root cause. And then one of the doctors, a psychiatrist that was managing my meds, he said to me, there is a small population of my patients that seem to do better with their depression if they add just a little bit of thyroid medication. And I said, my thyroid's normal because I had it tested numerous times. So that seems weird. But I tried 25 micrograms of Synthroid. He prescribed that to me and it made all the difference in the world. But then I got pregnant with my first child, and that OB-GYN doctor was very conservative with medications, and she wanted me off everything. So I went off everything, and then the rest is history. Then it just, I never ever really got better. And I wouldn't say I got all the way better with that, but the light sort of was like, wow, this is doing something. But I wasn't able to be on it long enough to, really reap the benefits of it. So I think that is kind of what made me see that there had to have been something more. And then just learning about the nutrition aspect and how the thyroid really affects, the other hormones as well. No, we're not this compartmentalized system that, works independently. Everything flows and works together. And that was the big takeaway that I learned. And so that's where I was like, okay, well, nutrition, biochemistry, we have to get into that to deal with sort of, the root causes. And I know everybody uses that phrase. It's kind of watered down now, but I think we all know what we mean by that. So that's kind of what I dove into.
And I think this is an important lesson because so many people think of thyroid, they think of weight gain or, these kind of more common symptoms. But depression, cholesterol issues, constipation, there's all these other things that can play in with a thyroid imbalance. And then, of course, there's all the other related hormones like insulin resistance and leptin resistance and, just sex hormones that also play into thyroid. So it really is important to get to why are you having whatever it is you're having, rather than just throwing a medication at it, which isn't going to fix the problem. That's not even helping you identify the actual problem. It's just kind of fixing the symptom in the moment. Maybe it doesn't even always work.
Hopefully,
I think this is a really important lesson. So let's dive a little bit more into the nutrition side of things. What did you find maybe that you were doing a little maybe not so perfect with your diet that ultimately did make a difference when you went more into the nutrition side of the healing?
The first thing was I was just thinking, okay, what can I do about inflammation? Which I know I could feel it sort of at that obvious level with my first pregnancy. I had preeclampsia. So obviously a lot of inflammation, that obviously very stressful on the body too. That among other things just going on in my life at the time as well, I think really kind of spurred those symptoms to be worse. So I thought, well, I need to deal with this inflammation, and probably one of the first things I could do is go gluten-free, see about the gluten thing with me. I wasn't thinking I had celiac disease, but I thought I must have had some kind of sensitivity to it. Testing did confirm that I did have a high level of sensitivity to it from some of the alternative testing things that we can do to look at that, among other things. So I first had, excuse me, first had gone gluten-free, and I started to see a difference within a week. And the difference is that I felt I didn't have typical GI symptoms like a lot of people do with gluten, but I had the swelling, I had the swelling in the face, I had mood issues, lots of depression, lots of anxiety, irritability, where that sometimes is we're just told as women that's just your hormones. You're
Yeah.
just hormonal. And which, yeah, we are hormonal because we have hormones, so do men. But the thing is for me, the gluten there is a peptide within those that can affect, the brain and how you function that way. So it was affecting my mental health for sure, but the inflammation was huge. So that I could tell within a week. Then I think the next thing was in that panel that I told you about that I saw the sensitivity to gluten was also, dairy, casein, protein, as well as soy and eggs. So instead of just doing kind of one thing at a time, because I was so desperate to feel better, I just eliminated all of it. I don't necessarily recommend that unless you kind of know what you're doing with it, because it's hard, it's stressful, it limits you a lot. If you have a history of eating disorder like I do, it is not recommended to do that because it kind of spurs that along and makes you afraid to eat. But I was so desperate to feel better. And so I did it. I did it. And I don't know if it made me improve faster or not, but I was just needing to get into that. So I think the gluten, to make a short story long, was the main thing that I started with.
Yeah. And that's a common one I see in a lot of people with a lot of different issues. Most of us, frankly, would just do better without gluten. Even if you don't have an overt allergy, even if your testing doesn't show some sensitivity, I've yet to find anyone that really doesn't see some noticeable differences when they eliminate gluten, especially if they eat quite a bit of it now,
Mhm.
in cereals and breads and pastas and just all the things that it's in. People really do just feel better without it. Like the social side of it is hard because, everything's built around bread and pasta and all of
Mhm.
these things. And so eating out becomes a little bit more challenging and people don't want to seem high maintenance and have to ask for special things. But you get to a point where you're like, I don't care. I want to feel better. And that doesn't make me feel better. And I don't care what other people think. And so, yeah, I think gluten is a big one. Did you find that ultimately you had to leave all of those foods out like permanently, or were you able to add some of those back in?
I learned that gluten, yes, I need to leave out. I mean, there's times where if I'm in a social setting or at a restaurant or traveling where, you just don't know. I mean, anytime you travel or go into a restaurant, I don't care if you are eating off the gluten-free menu or not. You just don't know.
Yeah.
So I'm not as hyper vigilant about it as I once was, but I definitely go for the gluten containing things in restaurants and traveling as much as I possibly can. But with dairy, after it was probably about 2 years, I was dairy free, and then or at least casein free, and then I would add things back here and there, and now I kind of feel like I know that I have a threshold. If I go over that, then I'm feeling inflammation, the gunky throat, the clearing of the throat, the itchy ears. But that I kind of know what that threshold is for me. I can have some heavy cream in my coffee in the morning. Usually I have 1 cup. And you don't need obviously much heavy cream to go with that. And so that's good. And then if there's cheese on something, like if I sprinkle feta on a salad, I'm fine. That
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
Eggs as well. I eliminated those for 2 years, and I think it was about 2 years. And there was a time where I would have even one egg and start to feel little bit nauseous, itchy ears. Like I'd have some of those delayed onset things, but now I don't seem to have an issue with those at all. But it took me during that time when I was not eating those foods, I also was actively healing my gut, even though I didn't have those typical GI symptoms, which is why I thought there's no way that I'd have an issue with gluten, that there was not a chance because I don't have those things you hear about. So I actively healed, the leaky gut. And then I think that's why I was able to work with those. Now I'm sure if I tested some things, something would show up, but I feel like day to day, those are not causing me issues.
Yeah.
So with soy, I just don't because of thyroid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's an important lesson here, that you don't have to have overt digestive issues to have gut imbalances.
Right.
You can have it show up as joint pain, as headaches, as fatigue, as skin issues, as just any number of things, slow wound healing, just all the things can come back to the gut. And almost everything really does have a gut component. Doesn't mean your gut's the problem, but
Mhm.
it does play a huge role in how well you heal, how well you recover, the types of foods you can eat, the responses you have to those foods. So I think
Mhm.
gut always needs to be a part of the conversation, regardless of what it is you're trying to solve.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and
Yes.
I also find that most people are able to add a lot of the foods back in, with the exception of gluten. That is one that just often doesn't work. For some people, dairy never does come back in. But yeah, I think a lot of times people are able to add at least small doses, like you found. Maybe there's a dose that you can't have, but
Mhm.
a lot of times people don't have to be so focused on avoiding every morsel of it in the long run once you heal that gut.
Well, and once people get mostly healed, and of course, if none of the reactions are, a true like the IgE type reaction, anaphylaxis type of thing, that's a different, we're not talking about that.
Nope.
But if you are in that phase where, like, here's an example. I worked with someone who kind of ruined their gut with certain products that are being pushed around in my area. And it was over a year and a half of her doing this. And her gut was kind of shredded. And so she had a lot of anxiety going into a place where she didn't know where the bathrooms were. She had a ton of issues, and it was around the dairy component that was in that product. And so anything dairy would not agree with her whatsoever. So we built her back up, started working on the healing things. And then she got to the point where she was mostly healthy with that. Her gut was mostly better. But then she knew that because of what we had worked on, she knew that if she was in a social setting or if she was traveling and there's cheese on something or whatever, that she knew that she might like risk it for the biscuit, so to speak, if she really wanted a piece of cheesecake or whatever. She knew then what she needed to do to overcome the symptoms. And her symptoms by then were not as severe. So she kind of knew what to do with it, and that she might struggle for, a few days, couple weeks, whatever it is. But then it was like, I'm in control. I've made this choice. I know now what to do with it. When you don't know what's happening and you feel like garbage all the time and you're walking around in the world trying to survive and be, do the things you're supposed to do, that's scary. And it just keeps that anxiety going, and it's just a full circle thing. There's so many
Yeah.
things to deal with.
Yeah, I think that empowerment is so powerful that you get to choose. You know what the consequences are going to be, if there are
Yeah.
any, and you get to choose. I almost think that's a better place to be than someone who maybe thinks they feel fine all the time, even though they really don't. They're just not aware of it. And so they don't feel compelled to make any changes or to, have that agency over their decisions because they don't have any symptoms, or at least
Yes.
nothing that they're correlating. And so I think sometimes it's actually better to have identified these issues, and then you do have control over, is it worth it? Is it not?
Right.
I can have a bite and not have a problem, but if I eat the whole thing, I'm going to have a huge problem. Or like, I know I'm going to feel like garbage for 3 days. You get to choose, but that gives you that power back. And
Yes.
so, yeah, when you're stuck in the miserable middle of not even knowing what's causing it, then yeah, that it's really life disruptive.
Yeah, when people don't even know what they don't know.
Yeah.
It's they like, you made the point, people don't even know that they feel bad because it's their normal.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a scary point. And I honestly think that I would say I think the people, by the time they come to me, they're very aware because I feel like I'm sort of the last resort for them because they've done all the other things that they know to do. But the whole idea is if they feel so terrible, but this has been conditioned to believe that this is normal because they're aging, or it's just normal to have joint pain all the time, or it's just normal to be tired. And we've been conditioned to believe this by our kind of the conventional setting. I mean, I hear this all the time and it's just passed off as whatever. So then they don't even think and they don't even know to help themselves or that they can be helped. And that's really frustrating to me. That's probably my biggest pet peeve in this business is that people don't think they feel like they can feel better and they think what they're feeling is just normal. It's just part of it.
Yep.
We're supposed to just feel terrible once you hit X age.
Yeah. And yeah, you're supposed to decline and you're supposed to have more pain and you're supposed to not be able to think and you're just, yeah, I'm with you. I don't think we should ever have to give in to that. I think there's always something you can do to improve and to at least reduce symptoms, if not completely eliminate them. So yeah, I think that's a great message. So I want to go back a little bit more to your thyroid story, and specifically like they were testing TSH only. You tried some of the thyroid meds that really seemed to help. How did you ultimately get back into focusing on the thyroid and figuring out what was really going wrong?
Not until I was diagnosed with cancer.
Okay.
It took that long. So
and how did that come about?
I went to a general annual physical and they were, they palpate your neck. And so that was just that. I just went to my yearly physical and it wasn't like I hadn't been there for 5 years or something. And she felt a nodule in my thyroid. But she said, most of these are benign, like vast majority of these are benign, no big deal. But let's just go have an ultrasound done, just have that checked out. Well, that came back normal, but I knew just because I know my symptoms, I know I've been feeling, and I know about the thyroid. I teach about this stuff all the time. I've had the education in it, and so I was like, I don't think this one is benign. I just for some reason had that gut feeling, and all my symptoms totally went with not necessarily the cancer part of it, but the thyroid dysfunction. But again, my thyroid was normal. TSH was normal. And that's how I dug into it. And it wasn't, I had that thyroid removed and then they started testing more of the markers that I was like, are you kidding? They never tested this stuff before. Cause I went back in my charts and there was only the TSH ever the whole time. They never tested antibodies. They never tested the free versions of the thyroid hormone, the free T3 and the free T4. That could have told a whole bit much, whole bigger story all along. And so that's when I learned until I didn't have a thyroid gland anymore because they removed the whole thing. And then it had spread to the lymph nodes. So there's just this ongoing monitoring. And it was interesting because the ultrasound, that first ultrasound that showed normal, a week later when I went to a different hospital, a big hospital system in my area, world renowned, they did their ultrasound and sure enough, it showed it. So it was just kind of mind-boggling and frustrating and disappointing. And so then I had, of course, at that point, I'm just going along with that treatment plan and, what they kind of do as their standard of care for this particular type of cancer in this setting. And then I started really being hyper vigilant about my markers and my numbers and my symptoms. And so I got to the point working with doctors and I had to leave that clinic because they were not helping at all for symptoms, the symptom part of it, because I never got better. I got worse with the symptoms. And so I switched to a different provider who was like, listened to my symptoms and was willing to try some other medications and help me with that. But I still had to, kind of drive that and ask for everything. And I had to be my own doctor, kind of, and thankfully he was mostly willing to listen and realize that I'm not just, making stuff up and trying to be dramatic about my symptoms or whatever it might be. He actually was supportive of that. And so that really helped. And because of that, I was able to, he allowed me to add a T3 medication. So I was taking the T4 for thyroid replacement because I'm completely dependent on thyroid medication. And I asked him, please, 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 can I just try some T3 medication just to see if this helps? Because I feel terrible. And I don't even want to go into the depths of how bad I was at this point. Everything was at a like extreme level, the depression, all of that stuff. And so he said, sure, we can try. You'll know within a couple of weeks if this will help you. And it did. And not a lot, but a little. So that's where I was like, okay, I know that I always wanted to just feel normal, but I didn't know what that meant. I just knew it wasn't where I was at. And just that kind of opened the door a little bit and allowed me to go, okay, things actually can get better. And I'm going to dig even deeper. So that's kind of when that I started with the nutrition a little bit before that, but I just went all in at that point. So then I quit my job and I went back to school. Like, you know, not extreme at all, but I just thought I needed to get into this stuff even
Yeah.
further.
It's so powerful when you get the right labs, you get the right information, and you get a provider that's willing to listen to you. Now, not everybody needs thyroid medication. You, of course, do because you don't have a thyroid, so you can't produce any.
Yeah.
But not everybody does. A lot of people do. And a lot of people, unfortunately, are not given the right medications or the right doses of the medications.
Mhm.
Huge portions of the population don't actually do very well on T4 only medications. They really do need the combination of T4 and T3 because you're not very good at converting from T4 to T3. And so there's so many options and so many nuances and so many other things that play in that unfortunately I think you have to be exactly like you were. You have to keep fighting for yourself. You have to keep asking for the labs, asking for different medications, asking to try different things, and just push and push and push, whether that be getting different doctors or just pushing the doctor you have. You have to be your best advocate. And thyroid is one of those situations where I see that almost always people have to fight for themselves because for whatever reason, it's just not an easy thing to go through.
Right. Well, and the whole thing with that setting that is so frustrating is that I had to work so hard and just push through, and I didn't have the energy to do it. And the thing about that is that a lot of people don't even have the understanding of so much of this that they
Right.
can't do that. So it's just really, really frustrating that that happens.
Yep.
And a lot of people just won't persevere because of it and they give up.
Yep. Yeah, because if you're not trained in this stuff, which the vast majority of people are not, you wouldn't necessarily know what to ask. You wouldn't necessarily know what to, demand. I want to try this or I want to try that. So yeah, you do kind of have to find someone who can help you advocate for yourself, someone who
Yeah.
does have this information, whether that be a functional medicine practitioner, a licensed nutritionist, someone that actually does have this training that can at least guide you in, what questions to ask, what labs to get. And a lot of us can do some of those things for you. And then you can go back to your doctor and be like, here, this is why I need this other medication or this other thing, or I need to stop this medication. Because unfortunately, a lot of conventional medicine just isn't going to do it.
No, and what I encountered and why I left my first place where they diagnosed and did all that, that part was amazing. You know, the diagnosis, the getting things going was absolutely amazing. And I appreciated that. But then the aftercare of, okay, how do you function now? They didn't really, that wasn't their interest. They didn't really care about that so much. And I was actually told when I would push and push and push to ask for other options or additional options, it was very much, no, this is not how we do it here. This is not our standard of care. And no, there's nothing else you can do. I mean, I was actually told there's nothing else you can do. Meanwhile, because of the cancer piece, I was on such a high dose of T4 medication to suppress any potential growth and tumors that I was like over medicated basically for that suppression, which I get on some level. But because they didn't test, the reverse T3, all that was being converted into reverse T3 and not free T3. So I had no energy. And obviously I was so stressed out. So which is part of that, but I had too much T4 and I was super stressed. It all was stored in this inactive, worthless little thing that was not helping me. But I didn't have them to support me on that. And they didn't, I would ask them about that, and it's not how they do it. So that's the other thing people are up against. They're up against the system sometimes, more than just an individual provider, but it's like the whole place. This is not how they do anything with thyroid. And I don't know if they still do. And that was a long time ago.
Yeah. No, I think it still happens. I think it's almost impossible to get the right testing. So you don't even know if you're converting to reverse T3, which is the inactive form of T3. So it's not doing you any good. They don't even know what their T3 levels are. They don't know what their T4 levels are. They only know TSH. A lot of times that's normal. So they're not doing the right testing. They are very restricted in the types of medications that they'll prescribe, if they'll even get you to that stage, if they even find that there is a problem. And yeah, there's just this whole system that doesn't seem to want to budge. And I don't know if that's insurance driven. I don't know if that's the just medical industry in general. I don't know what's behind that, but it is a very common story still today.
Yeah, because I've talked with a few providers that, I've been collaborating with and trying to get them a little bit more, because they're not, well, some take insurance, some do not, but they're little skeptical about even prescribing T3 medication, much less testing for it. And so I've like, what is the deal with that? With all the information out there? And obviously everyone's busy, they're in their practices, meeting their patients all day long. I get, people don't have a lot of time to dig into all the research. But what I was told by several of them now is that we are trained to test for TSH, and just recently, more recently, a T4 level, not a free T4, but a total T4, and you prescribe Synthroid or levothyroxine. If your level goes up to here, then give this. That is it. And anything beyond that, what we hear about, that can cause heart problems, or, all these things that is not, maybe 25 years ago, that was the understanding of it. They didn't quite understand it, but there's so much more out there now. And so it's hard to get people on board. And obviously as a provider, you don't want to do anything to hurt someone. And if you don't know or don't have the time or haven't seen it in practice working for people, because if that's not your specialty, then of course you're going to be a little leery. So it's slowly moving. It's just not quite there yet.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, that's true in a lot of different things. The thyroid is a great example because it's such a prevalent problem. Very few people actually get the right testing and treatments and all the things, at least right off the bat. There's this trial and error problem. But thyroid is also really complicated because it doesn't seem to function quite as black and white as a lot of other things, where you can't just look at a lab and go, oh, you're here, so you need this dose of this medication. That may work perfectly for one person and may leave the next person either feeling no different or feeling horrible.
Yeah.
It may take them too far. It may not take them anywhere. And so it really does need to be driven very much by how you feel, not what your labs necessarily say at that point. Once you've been diagnosed as having some kind of thyroid imbalance, there is no like black and white, well, here's your dose. You really have to kind of play with it and tweak it and continue it. And so many doctors, if they don't have that high level expertise, understandably so, they just don't even want to go there at all. Yeah. They're like, I wouldn't even know how to interpret that lab. I wouldn't know what to do about it if I got a result back. So I just won't even run it. And what they should be doing is saying, this isn't really my specialty. I think you should go see this person who specializes in that.
Yes.
Referring and for whatever reason, that's just not happening. And I don't have an answer for why that is the case, but that's where I think you have to say, I want to go see a thyroid specialist.
Yes. And that's not necessarily an endocrinologist. I mean, it should be. I mean, that should be the obvious person, but not all endocrinologists, it seems, are thyroid specialists. And so the ones I've been to, usually it seems like in the waiting room, I'm the thyroid person. and I'm younger, had been younger than the most of the other population by 20, 30 years minimum, and they're in there for diabetes. That's like the biggest thing, because obviously that's a huge chronic condition in this country. And so the thyroid, I think it's sort of forgotten. And also in my area, I find that I need to refer people. I'm like, I think you need, just by your labs, I think you need to go find someone, do you have a provider, whatever? And no, I don't have people that I can refer to. I have a few for really getting into the nitty-gritty of the thyroid. It's just not widely available,
Yep.
unfortunately. I
Yep.
don't get it, but it is
Yeah,
hard.
I keep hoping that maybe that will get better as, especially functional medicine comes up in it, and there's so much more discussion around it. And I think that has an influence back on even traditional medical schools, that the younger, doctors coming through these programs are much more functionally minded than
Mhm.
maybe they would have been 20 years ago, where they just kind of took everything the school taught them, which is amazing, but doesn't
Mhm.
cover all of these aspects really. And I think some of the younger generations are going to hopefully come in with more of this functional mindset and maybe be a little more open-minded to
Right.
try nutrition and lifestyle and supplements, and not always just throw a pill at it, and, maybe do some more comprehensive testing. Now, we have so much available to us today.
I know.
In the testing, in the literature, and just research and anecdotes, it's easy to reach out to other practitioners and say, what do you do in this case? Or what would you recommend? All of that needs to be happening more often than it is. And I get that people are busy, and I get that doctors don't necessarily like admitting, like a lot of us don't like admitting we don't know something or we're not that familiar with something, but that's not in your patient's best interest. And I think
No.
we need to kind of get back to that. So I'm hopeful that some of that will change. Like you said, it is slowly shifting. But that's also just the nature of, major industries, is they just move slowly, which
Yes.
is good. We don't want knee-jerk reactions either, because that
No.
often doesn't end up doing any better. So,
Nope, but it's a big machine, and it's going to take a lot of time to
yeah.
change a
And that
little,
doesn't help you if you're suffering today.
not at
It's going to
all.
take 20 years to turn this ship around.
It is. And I just, in fact, got labs from someone who is struggling, and she's about, she's in college. She's actually at the same college. She's my age. When I was really struggling, starting to struggle, she's 20 years old, and she's dealing with all these things. And she sent me her thyroid labs, and they look pretty normal, but there's all these signs and symptoms plus depression and anxiety, and she's just getting all the antidepressants and all the anti-anxieties she wants, but no support underlying whatsoever. But
Yep.
there's some numbers that I asked her to ask her doctor to get, and there's some that are not optimal by a long shot, but they're for sure in that normal range,
Yeah.
So she's not going to get help that way
Yep.
from that provider.
Yep.
So
Yeah, unfortunately, the lab ranges aren't really helping most patients because they're humongous.
yeah,
They're humongous. And so, yeah, the vast majority of the population is going to fall within the normal range, but
yes,
that doesn't mean you feel good. That doesn't mean it's optimal. It doesn't mean it's actually working. It's just that you fall within the averages of the population. Well, look around.
yeah, we're not
Population is
super
not
healthy.
exactly very healthy.
Well, and then her response too, and I remember feeling this too. It's like, I want something to be wrong so that I have something I can do to
Yep.
get better. And she's like, I'm really bummed out. I thought these look normal. I thought there was gonna be something I could do about it. And I'm like, well, not with them, but yeah, there are things you can do to improve this. But I mean, isn't that a kind of a sick state of affairs when we're hoping something shows up abnormal so that we can figure out how to feel better and everything. It's just defeating
It is.
after a while.
But it's
Yeah.
also validating to finally have a thing you can point to say,
Yes.
see, I'm not crazy. It's right there. I have a diagnosis. I have a problem. I have an imbalance. I have a whatever. It can be really validating to be like, okay,
Yes.
so everyone that thought it was all just in my head and I'm just crazy and I'm high maintenance and I'm a hypochondriac.
Oh my
No, it's
God.
a real thing.
Yes.
And it gives you something specific to target, to go
Hmm.
after, to do something about it. It's actually, I agree with you. It's kind of a sick and twisted way to go about it, but it's actually kind
Yeah,
of empowering because you know
it is.
exactly what to do.
Yes, because I know even after remember I said I got that extra, the T3 medication that helped me feel like, oh my gosh, I actually can feel better. But there was still, I still work on my nutrition. I just needed little more help to dig deeper, what else is going on with other imbalances. So I went to a naturopathic physician at that time, kind of working with the within the parameters of the thyroid medication. And I tell you, I had a 2-hour appointment with her the first time I met her, and she looked at me and I thought, I know I'm going to just have spent a ton of money, and she's going to say, everything is normal. I don't know what's wrong, that whole thing. And she goes, well, no wonder you feel like you do. There's just no, I mean, of course you don't feel good because of this, and this. And I cried because I was like vindicated. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't a hypochondriac. I wasn't all of these things. I wasn't just overly sensitive. I wasn't just lazy or whatever it was. And I felt so vindicated. And with that came the empowerment, even though it was really hard. It was really hard.
Yeah.
Still crawl out of the hole. It's like, okay, I got something. I can do something about it now. And now I do have more control, because I felt like I had no control before. I was just to take my thyroid meds and be on my way. All I knew I could do before.
Right. Yeah. And I think just knowing that there's actions you can take is empowering. So yeah, that's awesome. Let's, if people are interested in learning more about you and, how they can maybe work with you or, learn some of the lessons you've learned for themselves if they're struggling with these same kinds of symptoms and not getting anywhere with their conventional medicine provider, where would be the best place to send them?
So they could go to my website. It's called Rock Bottom Wellness. And I have a monthly membership in there, which I think is, again, very empowering. There's a lot of resources there for people, but if they go into that, they can get a one-on-one call each month, sort of concierge nutrition, and we can help make action steps on a month-to-month basis for accountability and just keeping track on it, but it would be specific to the individual. And there's all kinds of resources there to help people overcome their debilitating fatigue. It's called the Fatigue Fix Center Circle, because that was like the hot point for me. I was like, I was teaching, full time and 2 little kids. I can't be this fatigued. That was my thing. So that is like the biggest thing that they're going to get out of it, as well as dealing with the depression and anxiety. They're going to start to, get over the weight loss resistance and start to normalize things out. There's all kinds of resources there for them. So that's kind of my kind of jump in, get your feet wet, and really start to feel better for my monthly membership.
I love it. That's so awesome. And it's a unique model. So I think that's a lot of fun. And we will definitely link all that up in the show notes so people can find it really easily. Thank you so much for sharing your story. You've definitely had a wild ride and had, maybe not the ideal journey, but you survived it, you got through it, and now you're sharing it with other people so that they don't have to go through those same things. So I love the mission, and thank you so much for sharing your wisdom.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. To everyone else out there, have a great day, and we'll catch you on future episodes. Thanks for being a faithful listener to the podcast. I'd love it if you left me a 5-star review on this podcast so that others can more easily find this valuable information. Did you know I also work one-on-one with clients? I approach solving health challenges like I approached solving crimes, by conducting a thorough investigation into your case. Sadly, hundreds of millions of people in the US have insulin resistance, prediabetes, and diabetes, and the vast majority have no idea. I'm here to fix that. If you struggle with low energy, stubborn weight, hypertension, sleep disturbances, or any other undesired symptoms, let's talk. All you have to do is schedule a free call. The link will be in the show notes. And no, you do not need to live near me.